Welcome to Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda. We're going through the Old Testament. We're looking at each book of the Old Testament, book by book, and we are seeing how Jesus is revealed in each book. Because Jesus is the great theme of the Bible, both the Old Testament and the New. And Jesus is the key by which we can interpret all of the Bible. And we're in the book of Esther at the moment, and in our last Take 5 we looked at how Esther was a victim of people trafficking, who nevertheless God had brought her to the kingdom for such a time as this, to save the Jewish people from an act of genocide that was being planned against them. And we're going to continue with Esther because Esther became the intercessor for God's people. She had to approach the king. Tremendously dangerous thing to do because she was a woman in the king's harem. Basically, she was there to come if she was called. She was not there to approach the king when she chose. And yet, prompted by her uncle and knowing it could mean a death sentence, she nevertheless approached the king and found favour in his eyes and was able to bring her request and to intercede for the people of God. Now, she was the most unlikely person to be a candidate for being the intercessor on behalf of Israel. Israel had priests. Israel had religious professionals. Their job was to intercede for the people. And yet, Esther became the intercessor for God's people. Esther was somebody that many Jews would have looked down on. She had had no choice in ending up in the position where she was, but it was a degrading position. She was basically involved in immorality, as far as everyone else would see it, being abused by this pagan king. And yet, God chose her to be the intercessor for her people. Which is the exact same thing that happened when Jesus came. When Jesus came, there was a professional priesthood. It was very clear who the intercessors were. There were the priests, there were the scribes, and there were the Pharisees, and these were the people who were there to intercede. They were the intercessors for the nation. And yet Jesus comes along and he is the true intercessor because he knew so much more about prayer than all the rest of them put together. He repeatedly spent time in prayer. Sometimes he would spend entire days and nights alone in prayer. You know, I've come across people who say that you don't need to spend a lot of time in prayer. Just you command what you want and claim it by faith. But that's not what Jesus did. Jesus had more faith in his little finger than any of us. And yet Jesus spent hours and entire nights and days in prayer before his Father. You know, we look at the upper room ministry. One thing I love about when you look at the upper room ministry, that last night before Jesus was to go to the cross, and you see his ministry to his disciples. Yes, he spoke to his disciples. He broke bread with his disciples. But a large part of the upper room ministry is Jesus prayed for his disciples. And just to be able to sit in and listen into his praying. And of course, Gethsemane. He went to Gethsemane before his arrest. And what did he do there? He prayed. You know, Jesus is the ultimate intercessor, and that's great news because he is interceding for you and me right now. He's seated at the right hand of the Father, making intercession for us. Listen to these two New Testament passages. The first one is Romans chapter 8, verses 31 to 34. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? He who did not spare his own Son, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also along with him graciously give us all things? Who will bring any charge against those whom God has chosen? It is God who justifies. Who then is the one who condemns? No one. Christ Jesus, who died, more than that, who was raised to life, is at the right hand of God and is also interceding for us. And then Hebrews 7, 24 and 25, because Jesus lives forever, he has a permanent priesthood. Therefore, he is able to save completely those who come to God through him, because he always lives to intercede for them. Esther looked like the most unlikely person to be an intercessor for Israel, but she saved the nation through her intercession. Jesus, you know, that baby born to an unmarried carpenter and his fiancée in Bethlehem, did not look like he was a candidate to be the greatest intercessor the world had ever known. But that's who he is, and he's praying for you and me, and for that I'm so grateful, and I'm grateful that I can see Jesus in the book of Esther. God bless you today. Join us again tomorrow for another Take 5, your 5-minute inspirational message from Solid Rock Drogheda.